Throughout history, there have been countless unexplainable stories, events, and moments captured on audio. These horrifying tapes were archived, never to be heard again. Until now. These are the tapes of trepidation. Tape number 31. Apartment 1306. There's an apartment below mine on the 13th floor. The 6th unit at the end of the hall on the left. Now, I know apartment buildings, hotels and whatnot. I try to avoid the truth about the 13th floor, so technically it's apartment 1406. But I'd rather stick to the truth for now. You see, until about 2 months ago, that place wasn't for rent from what I knew. But then, a month later, I had heard someone had moved in. I can't say whether I was excited or not. I just hoped they wouldn't be partiers because I enjoy my sleep. Then, 1 month later, things started to take a turn. I had heard some noises coming from below, like shuffling around. 2 days later, there was more noise, like banging and muffled thumbs. 1 day later, I started to hear yelling. I was reluctant to call the police or the owner of the building, thinking it was a one-time thing, since there hadn't been any problems since they first moved in, aside from the shuffling noises, of course. But I was wrong. About a week had passed, and no noises were coming from below, so I thought it was finally over. I was wrong again. At about 3:28 in the morning, I heard a scream and loud thumping noises. Man, was I pissed. I headed out my door, and when I took the first step, I heard the screaming. It sounded like a woman, but I didn't care at the moment. I just stormed off down the hall to the exit stairs, and when I got to the apartment, I banged as loud as I could on the door. Not 3 seconds later, on the other side of the door, someone banged back on the door at me. I grew increasingly angry and kicked the door with my foot, hard and loud. The whole floor probably heard me, but I didn't care. The same thing happened, but this time, the person banged twice. I tried negotiating with whatever was on the other side of the door by saying, "Keep it down or I'm calling the police." As soon as I finished my sentence, there was scratching on the other side of the door. Then I heard the sound of a woman crying. I gave up. I was about to leave when my bare foot stepped in something wet and warm. I looked down, and what I saw changed my view of horror forever. What I saw was a deep crimson red pool of blood oozing out from under the door. I stood there, paralyzed in fear. It was just leaking from underneath. The sound of scratching filled my ears. Then, I got a burst of energy and decided to use it wisely by charging up the exit stairs, down my hallway, back into the safety of my apartment. I didn't get any sleep that night. All I could hear from downstairs were muffled thumps. The next morning, I decided to call the owner to notify him of the night before and that I was calling the police. I told him about the noise, the screaming, but not about the blood. I don't know why, but it seemed a little too unreal. I guess that's the word. But when I finished, what he told me next makes the blood look like a normal occurrence that night. He said, "But that unit's been vacant ever since the building was built." I just stood there, holding the phone. Once again, fear gripping me and unable to move. He asks if I'm there. "It's probably just the pops, man," he says casually, and hangs up. The events mentioned here happened in 2002. It's been 10 years now, and I have since moved away. From what I know, there was a fire that destroyed half of the building and made it uninhabitable. The news says it started in a unit, but they didn't release the number. I already knew which one it was. The building was torn down, and they've built a park there for kids in its place. And you know, sometimes, whenever I drive by there at night, I can still hear the screaming. This has been tape number 31, Apartment 1306, by the Tapes of Trepidation Horror Narration Podcast. Apartment 1306 was written by the Grimman, and it was originally posted on the Creepypasta Wiki. Narration, production, and sound design for this episode was by TJ Hodder. Music for this episode was provided by CO.AG. The Tapes of Trepidation theme was written by the incredible J.M. Scherf. All logos, banners, overlays, and graphic design work was provided by the talented Jason Reese from Jaybird Digital Arts. If you have a story you would like to submit, or a question regarding the show, please contact us at tapesoftrepidation.podcast@gmail.com. Support the show by subscribing and leaving a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcatcher, or like and subscribe on YouTube. Be sure to tell your friends. Word of mouth is extremely helpful to a new podcast like this one. And check us out on social media through the link tree in the show notes. We have Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. We have a lot of fun on Discord. Join up and come hang out with us. If you'd like to support the show a little more, consider joining the Tapes of Trepidation Patreon, where for as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to bonus short story narrations, the weekly behind-the-scenes podcast within the archive, and more. Come, join us, and become trapped within the archive. Just like my current patrons, Kelly Sisson, Neil Skarupa from Neurotic Voice, Doozer Pindan, Ronan Komori, Eric Phones, and Patrick Stewart. Thank you all so much for the support. All content used on Tapes of Trepidation is either original, used with permission, or is available on your Creative Commons share-alike license. All rights reserved, unless otherwise stated. This podcast and its content may not be redistributed or rebroadcasted without the express written consent of Tapes of Trepidation and the story's author. Thank you so much for listening.